Hello, welcome to Billy Bob's Album of the Month YouTube channel. Um, I recently started this because motherfucking Facebook started taking down all of my fucking text interviews somewhere in the middle of the summer. They just started dropping off like fucking flies, right? They were being flagged as fucking spam. So I decided to abandon that fucking format altogether and just start trying to do videos instead and post them up on the YouTube. Hence, that's what this is. One of my favorite interviews that I did was with BA from Sloppy Seconds, and that shit got fucking taken down. So I talked to BA, and we decided to do it again, and this time via YouTube fucking channel. So that's what this is, and we're about to segue into it right now. There ain't no two ways about it. There ain't no two ways about it. There ain't no two ways about it. You're gonna die. Let's just jump back right from the beginning. Tell me about the inception of Sloppy Seconds. How did it go down?
Well, it's a story a lot of people know already, but basically we were having a house party at my house when I was in high school, and my parents were out of town. And my friends were all over, and Danny, our original guitarist, had a guitar amp and PA microphone of his own because he'd been like doing little bar shows where we would just sing and play acoustic guitar. And the other guys just scrounged up instruments from people they knew. And we just, as the night went on, we got drunker and drunker. We just started playing these 50s songs really poorly. And I kind of became the singer by default because I was the only one who could remember the words when I was drunk. So I guess that's probably the most important thing to know about Sloppy Seconds is we didn't really come together to form a band. We were just friends, longtime friends who just got drunk enough to pick up instruments one night. So, and it took us about a year after that first night before we actually had enough material where we could play a whole set. So we played our first show in Bloomington, Indiana in the fall of 1984. And it was about 15 covers and one original. And from there, we just kept writing songs. And it was probably about another year after that before we actually had a whole set of original material. So that was how the band formed.
Awesome. Who coined the term junk rock?
I think that was our drummer, Steve Sloppy. I'm not sure. I know he came up with the name Sloppy Seconds. We called ourselves Mock Trash for about a half hour that first night. And then the movie Porky's was out at the time, and they threw around the term Sloppy Seconds a lot in that. And we thought, well, that sounds like us. You know, we're playing covers really badly. So Sloppy Seconds. Junk rock. I think that was probably around the time of our first album. We kind of had an unusual approach for the time. If most people listening to this probably won't be old enough to remember, but at the time we came together in the late 80s, there really wasn't such a thing as pop punk. There had been punk bands that had poppy elements to them, like Generation X and, you know, the Buzzcocks, certainly the Descendants. But most of the bands that would later be called pop punk were just kind of coming into existence at that time, like Screeching Weasel and Joe's lineup of the Queers, Mr. T Experience, Parasites, us. So the late 80s was just kind of a formative period for bands like that. And most of what was considered punk in the mid to late 80s was just kind of the hangover of hardcore, which was never really anything that we did. So it was kind of a different approach for us based on the music that was popular in punk circles when we were starting out. Because we, before we ever really even got into punk, we were listening to rock and roll on the radio. So the pop element was just something that seemed to come natural to us, although we're not nearly as sweet sounding as most of those bands. With me singing, it's going to be a rough edge no matter what you do. So I think it was the combination of the elements that went into the Destroyed album was, it was kind of old school punk and roll, Ramones Dictators kind of sound. And then there was a humorous aspect to it. And then we threw in all those pop culture sound bites and references and everything that are kind of commonplace now, but it was kind of unusual to do that at the time. And I think Steve kind of came up with the blanket term junk rock for what we're doing, and it seemed appropriate. So we've kind of made that our mantra ever since.
I'm so fucked up.
So you finally got enough songs around to record your first EP, the first 7 inches. Tell me about that experience, recording your first EP, getting in the studio for the first time.
Well, it was our first time in the studio to actually put out a recording of our own. We'd contributed tracks to some compilations up to that point, and Paul Mahern, who had been the singer of the Zero Boys, was the top engineer in town, and he recorded us. And we weren't really sure what kind of reception it was going to get, because like I said, I mean, there weren't bands doing weren't many bands doing the kind of stuff that we were doing at the time. It was a lot thrashier was what was popular. And so we only recorded the 4 songs that ended up on the record. We didn't have extra tracks to play with or anything. So we recorded those 4 songs, and we were kind of apprehensive about it. I wasn't sure that it was, a great performance on our part or anything, but Paul was real confident. He said, "Man, this record's really gonna get some attention." And surprisingly, we found out that he was right. It made a lot of people's top 10 lists for the year and everything. So from that point, we kind of figured, okay, well, there seems to be some interest in what we're doing. So then we did some more compilation tracks, and then I think it was about 2 years later when we finally had enough recordings available to put out a full-length album, and that was Destroyed.
Yeah. Tell me a bit about the Destroyed area, because that album is fucking non-stop bangers from front to back. Right? That album fucking is on one of my top 10s, because it's fucking great. It's great.
Well, it's definitely the one that everybody keeps coming back to. I mean, I've rarely heard anybody say they prefer any of our other albums to the first one. And it's the old cliche, you've got your whole life to write your first album, but interestingly, the songs on that record were almost all current within the year it was released. There were very few songs that we'd been doing for more than a year at the time we put that thing out. And basically it was just our live set. It was all the songs that we were playing live at the time. And there were actually some songs that we had at the time that we just decided didn't fit or weren't quite in keeping with the general feel of that record. And one thing I am very sure about is that we were right to wait to put out a full-length album, because I think a lot of bands, I should say, rush and record an album within the first year that they're together. And if we had recorded the first 13 songs we wrote, it'd be a piece of shit. Nobody would ever listen to that record. We had weeded out plenty of songs that weren't up to scratch by that point. But at that point, I have to say we were on a really strong songwriting streak. Literally, we would go in and record demos for what we were going to eventually put on this album, and then go home to listen to the tapes afterwards, and we would write 2 more songs the same afternoon. I mean, it was really kind of crazy. I wish we still had that kind of inspiration, but you're only 24 years old once, so that kind of stuff just the juices were flowing, I guess is the best way to put it. And with all the little references and sound bites and everything we threw on the album, and then that incredible album cover that Mike Kreffel painted for us, the album got a lot of attention, and the cover, I think, is responsible for a lot of that, because when we were in middle school, Kiss Destroyer was like the apex. I always, the Beatles wish Sgt. Pepper was Kiss Destroyer. That was our attitude. And so we kind of figured, what an absolutely balls out ludicrous thing to do is like, yeah, this is our debut album. This is our Destroyer album, and fortunately, one of the guys had a little brother who said, yeah, but you guys are always drunk, so maybe you ought to call it Destroyed. And I was like, ah, damn, that's a great idea. So that was where the album title came from. But yeah, it's definitely our statement album, I guess you'd say.
I'm tired of running from the CIA side. I'm running from the CIA side. I'm running from the CIA.
Tell me the story about that running from the CIA video. What was up with that?
Okay, well, that was right after the Destroyed album had been released. I think it was out. We may have just had the recording and the album hadn't been released, but there was this talent program on our local community access station. It's called Hitmaker Showcase, and we watched it religiously every week. We tuned in. Was hosted by this local soul singer on the Indianapolis scene who'd been around forever. His name was Paul Middlebrook. And he would, appear with, he had Jerry Curl and Lurex tuxedo and everything, and he'd come out and introduce bands. And the thing was, we ended up calling this show Hit Breaker Showcase because the show almost entirely consisted of breakdancing teams. I mean, this was before rap was even a thing, where every kid in middle school thought he could rap. They were just interested in breakdancing at the time, pop and lock. So it was just all these breakdancing crews, and then invariably there'd be a 13-year-old black girl who'd come out and lip sync to Boy George. She'd mouth along to the recording of "Do You Really Want to Hurt Me?" And I mean, that happened like more than once. There were 2 or 3 of these girls who just mouthed along to "Do You Really Want to Hurt Me?" And if not that, it was these pop and lock breakdance crews. That's all we ever saw on this show. So Steve, our drummer, got this wild hair up his ass one night and called up and asked, I'm really intrigued by the variety of music on your show. Would you consider booking a rock band on there? Oh yeah. We're open to all kinds of local music, and so he got this date, but I can't remember. Maybe he forgot to tell all of us what the date was. Something happened to where my job, I couldn't get the time off work to go on the day that this recording was to be done in the cable access studio. And when Roadkill, Danny, our original guitarist, found out that I wasn't going to be there, he didn't even want to get out of bed. So Steve and Boba just enlisted these 2 guys that we knew from a record store to portray the other members of the band, because the people on the talent show didn't know any better. So one of them pretended to be the singer, and one of them pretended to play guitar, and Steve and Boba just switched their instruments just to make it even more ridiculous. So that's why there's that stupid video of Runner from the CIA all over the internet. Nobody can figure out why Sloppy Seconds isn't actually the band on the video. It was a good laugh. We just didn't know it would be captured on YouTube forever. So.
Oh yeah, it has been eternalized.
Yeah, right.
Great stuff. So then you recorded your second album, Knock Your Block Off, which is another fucking great album. Tell me a little bit about that era.
Well, that one was recorded at a really strange time. Throughout that year, Danny was kind of losing interest in the band. He kind of wanted to get out, and we strung him along. Strung along isn't a good word. I mean, we kept his interest long enough to record that album, but at that point he was ready to go. And also we didn't really have a rehearsal space. So those, with the exception of a couple songs, most of those songs are more mid-tempo things that were just like written in people's living rooms or bedrooms when the whole band wasn't together and playing. So that's why it really has a different sound than any of our other records, because the songs were not really recorded with everyone. I mean, they weren't developed, I should say, with the whole band playing together. So it was a lot more of a, it's hard to say that anything we do is subdued, but it was a more relaxed tempo on a lot of the songs. And the songs were a little more contemplative than the more in your face, hilarious stuff that we like to do. And that might have been because of the kind of music we were checking out at the time. That right around that time, I was a big fan of like the Replacements and Soul Asylum and that kind of thing. And you can hear a little bit of that influence in the songs on that album, I think. So I don't think it's necessarily a good representation of what we do, but there are 3 or 4 songs off that album that we still play live pretty regularly. I will say, Lonely Christmas is probably my favorite song that we've ever done production wise. And that song came out pretty much exactly as I envisioned it. So I think the album's a good listening experience. It's not necessarily the easiest album to play live. So like I said, there's 4 or 5 tracks that we play off that one still, but it's, compared to Destroyed, we could, on any given night, we could play any one of the songs on Destroyed in our set, and we usually play more than half of them. So.
Speaking of live, your next album was No Time for Tuning, which is very relatable to me because me and my band once recorded an album, a live album, that we were horribly out of tune on. And by the time we went to fix the tuning, the dude accidentally stopped the recording. So the only part we have of the recording is us out of tune. We called it Tune Deaf ourselves.
There you go. That's good.
But you also around the same time had the Sloppapalooza. I'm really curious about this Sloppapalooza. Tell me about how that went down.
Well, Sloppapalooza kind of evolved. We had built up a really good local following to where our shows were regularly drawing anywhere from 500 to 700 people here in town. And a lot of punk bands at the time would skip Indianapolis on their touring schedule because it just didn't have much of a reputation. So along with the manager of what was our main hometown venue at the time, the Emerson Theater, our drummer Steve got together with him, and they came up with the idea that he had the contacts of these bands whose booking agents usually wouldn't bring them to Indianapolis. And we had some contacts with some other bands that we knew too. So we figured if we would stage a festival here in Indianapolis, all our hometown fans are going to come anyway. And it'd be a great introduction to playing in Indianapolis for bands that we like or bands that maybe had skipped touring here previously. And the first year, the Queers played and Jeff Dahl band, the Jeff Dahl group, band called the Royal Pendletons from New Orleans came up to play. Then we had some local bands on the bill too. The Smears from Bloomington, Indiana played. And it was a good show. It drew like I said, about 600 people, which was, pretty good for a Saturday evening gig. So we continued it on the next year, which would have been 95, I believe. And we were able to convince more bands to sign on, and it became a bigger show. We actually had that one in what had been a venue for wrestling matches. It was the Tyndall Armory here in Indianapolis. And that was another good one. The Riverdales played, and the Undead, Hagfish, which, you could probably name on one hand the number of people that have seen a Hagfish concert. And we had a band we toured with over in Germany called Le Cry. They had come over to visit, so they got to play in front of a great crowd in Indianapolis. And Mr. T Experience played, a lot of good bands. And then in '96, we got even more bands to come from out of town. That was probably the biggest one. And there were, I think, about 1,200 people at that one. That was, which for Indianapolis is huge for a punk show. So we did it 3 years running, and it definitely served its purpose. Bands started booking shows in Indianapolis after that because we were really lucky as a band. The punk scene kind of grew along with the progress of our career. So, initially we were playing for, 150 people or so, but over the course of about 2-3 years, we built this steady crowd up to about 500, 600, 700 people would come to see us. And it was a good payback to the hometown too, because, so many times we would have to drive over to Cincinnati or up to Chicago to see a band we wanted to see live because they just didn't come to Indianapolis. And to whatever extent we were able to help correct that, then Sloppapalooza was a really good experiment.
I think I'm gonna go home because you just ran out of beer. And there's nothing you can say that'll make me want to stay around here.
You ended up on Nitro Records with More Trouble Than They're Worth, right? Tell me about that experience. That was a step up.
We were introduced to Dexter Holland, who ran Nitro Records, by Jason McLean, who was the guest vocalist on their big hit Come Out and Play. He's the guy that leans into the camera and says, "You got to keep them separated," that guy. So he was a fan of ours, and he encouraged Dexter to give us a listen. And when the Offspring came here into Indianapolis to play, after the show, we met with him on the bus, and he agreed to do the record with us. So it was good because we had a budget, and they actually fronted us some money to go out and buy an airport shuttle to use as our touring vehicle for a while. So it was a good experience. We did the 2 records with them. We did the More Trouble Than They're Worth album, which was much more a return to the basics of the kind of sound we had on Destroyed, I think. And then afterwards, we wanted to put out a new release since we were finally on a label that seemed to understand what punk rock was about. And but we'd used up another 16 songs on our album again. We have a tendency to put way too many songs on our records, so we didn't have a whole lot of original material, and we just figured we would release a covers record, and that allowed us to do another parody album. We did a parody of Metallica's covers record, and instead of Garage Days Revisited or whatever they called it, we called ours Garbage Days Regurgitated. It was just kind of a collection of 6 or 7 songs that we liked jamming on, that we'd found in import bins or from lesser known things. The only really big popular punk song I'd say that we ended up doing on there was, we did a cover of TV Party by Black Flag, and I think our version kind of sucks, but it had a couple songs on it that we do play live sometimes, so it served its purpose too. I mean, it was just we wanted to keep product out so that our fans wouldn't lose interest while we were busy writing songs for another album.
Then there was a quite a big break before the release of Endless Bummer. I mistakenly originally thought that you guys had broken up and then got back together, but you informed me
A lot of people did.
yeah. But Endless Bummer was a great album. Tell us about why it took so long to release that.
Well, we started writing songs for it, like I said, right after More Trouble Than They're Worth came out. We had a couple right out of the gate. I think the first one we came up with after that was probably Achy Bricky Skull. But like, it was crazy. We wrote You Can't Kill Joey Ramone just shortly after Joey died. And I mean, that gives you some idea. I mean, what was that, 2001? And the record didn't come out till 2008. That we had by about 03, I'd say we had a really solid bunch of songs, and we would approach all these labels, and like you said, maybe they thought we'd broken up or something because everybody was kind of standoffish with us. And then finally we went in on our own to record the songs, and we ended up with like 18 tracks, and we figured, okay, well, now all we really need to do is give this a proper mix and, put it out. And even then we couldn't convince anybody to, I shouldn't say that. I mean, we would get to the point where we would say, okay, well, here's the tracks. All we need to do is book time for a mix down, and then you can send it off to the pressing plant. And they're like, well, we don't really have the money to do that right now. And that happened like 2 or 3 times, believe it or not. So the tracks for that album were recorded like in 2005, and they didn't actually get released until 3 years later. And it was just by chance. Steve had called up Dave Parasite and asked him what his opinion was of Go-Kart, the label that he had been recording for. And he said, well, look, Go-Kart just gave me permission to do my own imprint label, and I've only put out this Kitty Covers album so far. So I think this would be a great opportunity for both of us. It'd give me a really good band on the roster, and people have been jerking you guys around. So that was when we went in, did the final mix, and the record finally got released, I believe. Well, it was supposed to be in June of 2008, but then the pressing plant staged a protest over the material, and they wouldn't press it. So it ended up coming out about a month after. So it must have been like July of 2008. It was kind of infuriating because we had already scheduled a record release party and everything, and we're like, all we need now are records, So, but I think it's a really solid album, top to bottom. I mean, everybody's impression when it came out was like, wow, 20 years on, they still sound exactly the same. So I guess that's a good thing. You don't want to stray too far from your roots.
Yeah, it was a great album.
The world is a wasteland, from Green Bay to Graceland. There's no one fit to lead the human race.
Got 5 more minutes left. I'm going to throw in this question from Mike Snyder. My friend Mike Snyder wants to know who sang that acoustic version of Human Waste on the remaster of Destroyed.
Oh, it's me. The main vocal is me. The backup vocals, the real high pitched vocals, is Danny, our original guitarist. It was just me and him in the studio, and him on acoustic guitar. So it's just me. It's that's what it sounds like when I actually try to sing something and I'm not screaming. So
Okay.
but it does sound different. I'll grant you that.
Play with your records.
Play with my records.
Stretching and mixing.
Well, it's trying to tell you, you ain't got a goddamn drop of oral in that goddamn thing.
Was that really on the Destroyed album? Was that really your parents getting on to you about your car being fucked up? They told you to just play with your records?
It wasn't my parents. It was our drummer Steve. He's the one who let all the oral run out of his car, and he could tell that there was a really good argument brewing. So he just kind of grabbed a cassette player and hit the record button, so he captured the whole thing, which is kind of funny. They think it's really cool that this argument with his parents is captured on record forever. And people recite it like the Pledge of Allegiance at our shows sometimes, you know. Like, if we actually open the show with it, we'll play the recording, and like half the audience is like mouthing along and saying the whole parts that they know by heart, which I think is hilarious. It's just this screaming match between him and his parents.
Yeah, it is hilarious. Play with your records.
Your brother's in prison and your mom's drunk. Your daddy makes you play with the elements drunk. You might as well face it if the spinach fits. Cut to the chase and show it shit.
Are you you released a couple splits recently? Are you working on any new material?
We've got some songs laying around that we haven't recorded yet, and there's the only thing is it's kind of tough for us right now because we're kind of spread out. Steve and I still live in Indianapolis, but our current guitarist Ace has always lived elsewhere. He originally was from Illinois. Now he's living down in Nashville, Tennessee, and Boba's been out on the West Coast for a long time. So again, it's kind of hard to get together and work on material. I don't think it'd be too tough to get together and work up some song fragments that we've had for a while. But problem is, every time we get together these days, it's usually to rehearse so that we can go out and hit the road. So I hope we'll be able to get together and do another album. You know, we've got enough songs. You'll definitely see some material come out from us. I hope some of it's new and unreleased, but we're always kind of thinking about what would make our fans happy. So we'll see what happens.
How fucking cool was that shit? Very informative. And like I said, BA had already answered most of them questions before, but Facebook took that shit down. So hence the reason why this video exists. But please make sure to like and subscribe to my channel. I'm going to keep fucking trying to do awesome interviews like this and keep posting them up. And then I'm going to post up whatever the fuck else I feel like posting on this channel because it's my fucking channel and I can do that shit. So thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and click that fucking alert button, right? I guess that shit's good for my channel. And fucking comment on my videos because that shit's good for my channel too. Yeah, fucking rock that shit. Thank you.